Model. The chime of the old grandfather clock still echoes in my memory from that evening. Dusk had already settled, casting long shadows. My hands trembled as I stirred a pot of pasta, long past al dente, while a parade of every anxious thought a grandmother could conjure marched through my mind. Leo was late, not just 5 minutes having missed the bus, but hours late. When he finally walked through the door, his face was pale, his eyes swollen, and he uttered a sentence that etched itself onto my soul. "Grandma, I stayed late because I had to decide what kind of man I'm going to be, and I needed to talk about you." If you're a parent or a grandparent, you know that visceral drop, that feeling when your heart sinks to your stomach. One moment, you're ready to scold them for their thoughtlessness. The next, you're clinging to them as if they were 5 years old again. I imagined the worst, a schoolyard brawl, falling in with the wrong crowd, or something far more sinister that my mind barely dared to whisper. But what he revealed that night wasn't about trouble at all. It was about affection, sacrifice, and a choice I never anticipated him making at 18. And it all began with a simple, terrifying message that never arrived. Before I dive into the full narrative, let me ask you, where are you listening from? Share your city in the comments below. I'm here in a quiet little town not far from the bustling heart of Georgia, sitting at my worn wooden kitchen table as I recount this to you. I love seeing the tapestry of places you all represent. From the bright lights of New York to the vast landscapes of Texas, the golden shores of California, and the sunny warmth of Florida. It makes me feel a little less isolated, as if we're all gathered in the same comforting living room. All right, let me transport you back to that pivotal day. My name is Clara. I'm 61 years old, and I've been Leo's primary guardian since he was 7. His mother, my daughter, lives in another state with her new family. I say that without a trace of bitterness now. It's simply a fact of our lives. Her path diverged, and somehow fate placed Leo squarely in my small rented house on the corner, with its perpetually creaking porch and a resilient rosebush that defied all odds. It was a Wednesday I remember distinctively, because Wednesdays were my longest shifts at the local market. 8 hours on my feet, the relentless hum of fluorescent lights, an ache in my lower back, and a practiced smile for customers who would quibble over insignificant price differences. I'd come home, kick off my sensible shoes, and immediately glance at the clock. 3:50 p.m. Leo's school bus typically dropped him off around 3:40. Perhaps the bus is running late, I murmured to myself, placing my purse on the counter. I poured a glass of water, trying to quell the nascent stirrings of anxiety. I'd learned over the years that worry was like a rocking chair. It keeps you busy but doesn't move you forward. Still, I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked for messages. Nothing. 4:05 p.m. "All right, Clara, breathe," I whispered. He's 18, not 8. Leo had just embarked on his final year of high school. He was tall, a bit gangly, with that perpetually tousled sandy brown hair that never seemed to obey his wishes. He had his grandfather's eyes, a gentle hazel that could shift from serious contemplation to playful mischief, depending on the set of his mouth. Lately, though, his expression had been weighted, distant, as if he carried a burden he couldn't articulate. At 4:20 I sent him a text. "Sweetheart, everything all right? Bus late?" No reply. 10 minutes later I called. It rang and rang until his voicemail message began. His recorded voice, bright and youthful, chirped, "Hey, it's Leo, leave a message." It sounded as if it were any other ordinary day in his life, not the day his grandmother began envisioning every harrowing news headline. My mind immediately veered to places I'm not proud of. I pictured fender benders, negative influences, school altercations. I thought of those tragic stories on the evening news and wondered, how could that happen? Until suddenly you realize those families never believed it would happen to them, either. By 5:10 I was pacing the living room carpet. The television was on, a low murmur, but I wasn't truly watching. The afternoon sunlight had receded, replaced by that tired gray light that makes everything appear older and more somber. His athletic shoes, the ones he always discarded without bothering to untie, lay by the door. His denim jacket was draped over the back of the armchair. The house felt infused with Leo's presence, but Leo himself was absent. I called the school. No one answered. Office hours were clearly over. My palm grew slick on the phone as I stared at his name in my contacts. I considered calling his friends, then remembered I barely knew them. That realization stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. When had I grown so old that my grandson's world existed almost entirely outside of mine? By 5:40, I was on the verge of tears. I stood at the kitchen window, gazing out at the deserted street. The sky was a bruised tapestry of orange and deep purple. I whispered a prayer, not an eloquent one, just a raw plea. Please, God, please let him be safe. I can't lose him too, I can't. Then at 5:52, yes, I checked the precise time, headlights swept across the front of the house. My breath hitched. A car door thudded shut. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. The front gate creaked open. The doorknob turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his shoulders hunched as if returning from a war zone rather than school. "Leo," I snapped, my immense relief tinged with exasperation. "Do you have any idea?" He looked up, and whatever reprimand was about to escape my lips died there. His eyes were glistening, not just tired or irritated, but truly wet. His jaw was clenched, and there was a discernible tremble in his lower lip, a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was 10 and had broken his favorite toy truck. "I'm sorry I'm late, Grandma," he said, closing the door behind him with an unusual gentleness. My heart was thudding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "What do you mean, bigger?" He took a shaky breath. "I've been staying late this past month sometimes. Not every day, but enough. Working on my grades, talking to my teachers, keeping my GPA up. Coach recommended me for this scholarship, kind of a last-minute thing. They needed someone who's shown resilience and leadership and all that. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to get your hopes up, or mine. I wasn't breathing, I couldn't. And today," he said, his voice cracking just a little, "they told me I got it, full tuition, housing, books. It's for a university in another state. They said it's a big deal. They want an answer by Monday." My head reeled. A part of me wanted to leap up, embrace him, cry, and shout, "Yes, of course." But another part of me, smaller, more selfish, felt a tightening in my chest at the words, "another state." I had grown accustomed to his footsteps in this house, the familiar creak of the refrigerator door opening late at night, the socks perpetually abandoned on the armchair, the way he'd call "Good night, Grandma" from down the hall. I must have appeared conflicted, because he offered me a sad, knowing smile. "Yeah," he said, "that's kind of how I felt too." I finally managed to articulate, "Leo, that's wonderful. That's incredible. Why on earth didn't you call me the second you found out?" He looked down again, blinking hard. "Because, Grandma," he almost whispered, "I almost said no." Those words struck me with more force than any physical blow. "What do you mean, no?" He shrugged, his shoulders trembling. "I stayed late because I told them I wasn't sure. I told them I have you. That you shouldn't be working this hard at your age. That I can't just run off to another state while you're here worrying about rent and the car and your back, and everything else." Something inside me fractured. My eyes stung. "You stayed late to say no to a full scholarship?" I whispered, incredulous. He nodded. "Yeah. I told them I'd think about it over the weekend, but that I didn't want to leave you alone." We sat in a heavy silence for a moment. The old clock on the wall chimed loudly, as if to remind us that time continued its relentless march, whether we acknowledged it or not. Then he spoke the sentence that would reside in my heart for as long as I drew breath. "Grandma," he said, his voice steady now, resolute. "I stayed late because I realized my whole life you've been sacrificing your dreams for me, and today I almost sacrificed mine for you, and that's not what you raised me to do. I needed to figure out if I was brave enough to choose the future you fought for." Tears overflowed before I could stop them. I had always known Leo was a good kid, but in that moment, I saw the man he was evolving into. Thoughtful, fiercely loyal, torn between love and an immense opportunity. He reached across the table, his large, rough hand covering my smaller, aging one. It brought back a flood of memories of all the times I had held his hand when he was little, crossing the street or walking into kindergarten. Now it was his turn to steady me. "I don't want to hurt you," he said softly. "I don't want you to feel abandoned. But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life working dead-end jobs and watching you wonder if all your sacrifices were for nothing. I needed to talk to them, to tell them about you, about everything you've done since I moved in, and I needed to ask myself if turning this down was really loyalty or just fear." His hand was warm over mine. The kitchen light cast a soft glow on the silver strands in my hair. I could see my reflection in the window. An older woman with tired lines etched around her eyes, sitting opposite a young man striving to become something more. "What did you decide?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, just a faint curve of his lips. "I decided not to decide until I talked to you. That's why I'm late. I stayed there, going back and forth with them, telling them I couldn't give an answer until I saw my grandma. Until I heard what you wanted for me, not what you think you should say. What you really want." I leaned back in my chair, the profound weight of his words settling deep into my bones. For years I had told him, "I just want you to be happy, the way parents and grandparents always do." But happiness, I knew, was far more complex than that. It was late-night shifts and aching legs and empty rooms when the people you love grow up and venture out into the world. I thought about all the times I'd watched him sleep when he was younger, wondering what kind of man he would become. I thought about the nights I'd meticulously counted pennies to ensure we could cover his school fees. I thought about the secret fear I'd never voiced aloud, that I would fail him, that my best wouldn't be enough. And now here he was, on the precipice of a new life, asking me whether he should leap. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and took a shaky breath. "Leo," I said, "can I ask you something first?" He nodded. "When you were sitting there talking to those people, thinking about this scholarship, were you excited? Even just a little?" His eyes flickered, and I caught it. The spark. The same spark I'd seen when he spoke about his favorite classes, or the first time he visited a college campus for a tour. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was. I pictured myself there, in a dorm, in real classes, starting fresh. I felt, I don't know, alive. But then I thought about you, and I felt guilty for feeling that way." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand back. "That feeling," I said quietly, a profound certainty in my voice. "That alive feeling, that's what I've been working for all these years. Not just keeping the lights on, not just making sure there's food on the table. I've been working for that. For you to know what it's like to have a life bigger than this little kitchen." He swallowed hard, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "But what about you?" he asked, his voice raw. "What about this house? The bills? Your back? I can't just—" I stopped him with a small, reassuring wave of my hand. "We'll talk about that," I said. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against his arm, letting the warmth of his embrace soak into my tired bones. Somewhere deep inside, a little knot of fear, tightly bound for so long, finally loosened. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just his coming of age. It was mine, too. A moment where I had to let go, just a little, and trust that all the sleepless nights, all the worries, all the quiet sacrifices had led us right here, to this choice. What transpired over the next few days, the phone calls we made, the arrangements we meticulously discussed, the fears we bravely confronted. That is a story of its own. But that evening, in that small kitchen, with the ticking clock and the cold pot of pasta on the stove, I watched my grandson become a man, and I learned how to lovingly release him into his destiny. The following morning, I awoke before the sun had even hinted at its ascent. I'm not entirely sure if it was the unusual quiet of the house or the persistent heaviness in my chest that roused me from sleep, but I knew, even before my eyes fully opened, that nothing about this day would feel normal. Leo was leaving for school early. He had mentioned it the night before, after we both finally composed ourselves and the kitchen had transformed from a battlefield of emotions back into the comforting heart of our home. "I need to go in tomorrow," he had told me, rubbing his tired eyes. "I need to tell them my answer, and I want you to be okay with it before I do." Those words had echoed through my mind all night, reverberating through the quiet hallways of our small house. When I walked into the living room, he was already awake, sitting on the couch in the dim pre-dawn light, his backpack resting at his feet. He looked older somehow. Not in a weary way, though he was undoubtedly tired, but in that profound way young men often appear when they've made a significant, life-altering decision. "Morning," I said softly. "Morning, Grandma." I gazed at him for a moment, truly taking him in. His hair was still a delightful mess, of course. He still had a slight slouch when he sat, but there was something new in his expression, something steady and resolute. "Do you want breakfast?" I asked, my voice a little husky. He shook his head. "My stomach's kind of tight." I smiled gently. "Mine too." He let out a small, almost nervous laugh. Then, without warning, he shifted over and sat directly beside me on the couch, our shoulders touching. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward in that characteristic way he always adopted when he had something important to say but didn't quite know how to begin. "Grandma," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant, "are you really okay with this? I know what you said last night, but it's a big thing." I took a slow, deliberate breath. The morning light was beginning to seep into the room, painting thin, ethereal gold lines across the carpet. "Of course it's big," I affirmed. "It scares me. I won't pretend it doesn't. The house will feel different without you, quieter, but I'm not raising you to keep you under my wing forever. I'm raising you so you can fly, without looking back every 5 minutes to see if I'm still standing." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I don't want to fly away from you. I know," I whispered gently. "But flying doesn't mean leaving me behind." He nodded slowly, absorbing that truth in a way only someone on the cusp of adulthood can. We sat there in a soft, comfortable quiet for a few minutes. The refrigerator hummed its steady tune. A lone bird chirped outside the window, and then he said something that tugged at my heart in that familiar, profound way. The way that reminds you just how much power love truly holds. "If I go," he said quietly, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, "and something happens here. If you ever need anything, I don't want to be too far to help." "Life doesn't stop for either of us, Leo," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "But that's part of growing up. You'll be building your own life, your own world, and I'll still be here. Maybe working a little less, maybe complaining a little more." I attempted a smile, "but I'll be okay." I remembered hugging him when he first moved in with me, his small arms clinging desperately to my waist. I remembered holding him when he failed his first math test, when he scraped his knee, when he cried because he missed his mother. This hug was profoundly different. It wasn't a child needing comfort. It was a young man grounding himself, drawing strength before taking a momentous step he couldn't retrace. When he finally pulled away, his eyes seemed brighter, clearer. "I'll text you when I'm done," he said, a promise in his voice. "Please do," I answered, a slight tremor in my own. He turned, heading down the worn walkway toward the street, and for a moment I just watched him. This tall boy undeniably becoming a man. But halfway down the walkway he paused, looked back, and then uttered something that broke me open all over again. "Grandma," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Thank you. Thank you for the way you raised me, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." I pressed a hand to my chest, a profound welling of emotion. "You made it easy," I whispered, though he was too far to hear. He smiled, a small but utterly genuine smile, and then continued walking. The car that picked him up was one of his friends. I waved, though my hand trembled slightly, until they pulled off and disappeared around the corner. Then the house fell silent. Inside, the quiet felt larger, more expansive than before. It wasn't frightening, just unfamiliar. I put on a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. It struck me in that moment. Change doesn't always arrive like a clap of thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly, slipping through the front door in the shape of a growing boy with tired eyes. Sometimes it sits at your kitchen table, holds your hand, and asks you to bless its freedom. Around 9:30 my phone buzzed. "Grandma, I told them yes." That was it. No lengthy explanation, no detailed account, just those 5 simple words that changed everything. I felt my eyes sting again, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was something softer, something that settled in my chest like a warm, radiant light. I typed back with slow, steady fingers. "I'm proud of you, Leo, more than you know." He didn't respond right away. He was probably filling out forms, talking to counselors, taking the myriad next steps toward a life that would inevitably pull him further from this kitchen and closer to the incredible person he was meant to be. And I sat there, letting the profound reality of it wash over me. The next few days were a blur. Calls with the school, detailed conversations about dorm assignments, impending deadlines, endless paperwork, and long lists of things he would need to take with him. Through it all, Leo remained remarkably close, perhaps even closer than I had anticipated. He checked on me more often, inquiring if I was feeling all right, offering to pick up groceries or mow the lawn without being asked. One evening, as we were sorting through his clothes, he sat down on the edge of the bed beside me and said, "Grandma, I want you to come with me when I move into the dorm. I want you to see it. I want you to be the one who helps me set things up." "Of course I'll come," I said, laughing softly, my heart swelling. "Who else is going to make sure your socks aren't stuffed in the wrong drawer?" He smiled, and I saw something in his face I hadn't consciously noticed before. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of tender affection that felt utterly new. "Grandma," he said, his voice soft. "When I told them yesterday about why I hesitated, they said most kids don't talk about their families the way I talked about you." "Oh, really?" I teased lightly, my heart fluttering. "And how exactly did you talk about me?" His cheeks flushed the faintest shade of pink. "I told them," he said slowly, his gaze thoughtful, "that I grew up with someone who gave me everything she didn't have, who taught me what it means to truly show up for someone, who made me the kind of man who wants to take care of people, not hurt them." The raw sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. "You're a good man, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He leaned his shoulder against mine, letting his head rest lightly against me. "I learned from the best." There it was, that delicate, powerful emotion, the kind that sneaks up on you and fills the room without warning. Not romantic, not inappropriate, nothing crossing any boundaries. Just a deep, soul-level connection between two people who had painstakingly built their lives around each other for years. A bond that felt as solid as ancient stone and as fragile as spun glass all at once. As the moving day rapidly approached, I found myself watching him more intently, meticulously memorizing the way he laughed, the subtle inflections in his voice, the effortless way he filled our small house with his presence. Each passing moment felt like a tiny, unspoken goodbye, even if he didn't perceive it that way. The night before he was scheduled to leave, we sat on the couch together, watching some old movie we'd seen a dozen times. He rested his head lightly against my shoulder, a gesture he hadn't made in years, and I found myself gently stroking his hair, just as I used to when he was a small boy. He didn't pull away. He didn't say anything either. He simply allowed me to hold on to that precious moment, suspended in time. Finally, near the very end of the movie, he whispered, "I'm scared." I closed my eyes, letting the raw vulnerability of his confession sink deep into me. "I know," I said softly, my voice filled with understanding. "But being scared doesn't mean you're not ready. It just means you're human." He turned his face slightly toward me, his breath warm against my cheek. "Will you miss me?" The question was so simple, so utterly vulnerable, that it cracked me open even further. "More than you know," I confessed, a tear tracing a path down my temple. "But I'll be okay, and I want you to go. I want you to live your life fully. I want you to experience things I never did." "But what if things change, between us?" he asked softly, a tremor in his voice. I shook my head gently, a profound certainty in my heart. Things will change, they're supposed to. But change doesn't take love away, Leo, it just reshapes it. He let out a slow, shaky breath, then whispered, "I just don't want to lose this, you and me." I placed a hand gently on his cheek, turning his face toward mine, my thumb brushing away a stray tear. "You won't lose me, Leo, you never could. Some bonds don't break, they simply evolve." He nodded, his eyes closing for a moment as he leaned into my touch, seeking and finding comfort. It was tender, profoundly emotional, utterly human, a moment of deep closeness forged over years of shared struggles and quiet victories. And as he pulled back slightly, he uttered something that settled forever in the deepest, most sacred part of my heart. "Grandma, you're the reason I'm becoming the man I want to be." That night, after he had finally gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, allowing the full weight of everything to wash over me. The fierce pride, the lingering fear, the boundless love, the undeniable tide of change. Life is strange that way. One day you're helping a small boy tie his shoelaces. The next, you're watching him stride into a future that no longer requires your guiding hands. But what he said, the profound sincerity with which he said it, left me with a sense of peace I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't leaving me behind. He was carrying me with him. In his choices, in his unwavering courage, in the remarkable man he was becoming. The day of his departure arrived with a mix of sunshine and a crisp autumn breeze, mirroring the emotions swirling within me. His car was packed, his dorm essentials carefully organized. We had shared a quiet breakfast, the silence punctuated by the clinking of forks and the gentle murmur of our last few hours together in this familiar space. As we stood by the car, ready for him to leave, Leo turned to me, his gaze serious. "Grandma," he said, pulling something small and crinkled from his pocket. "I wanted to give you this." It was a faded photograph, one I barely remembered. A picture of me, much younger, holding a tiny, beaming Leo on my hip, both of us laughing. "I kept it in my wallet all through high school," he explained, his voice a little shaky. "It reminded me of what I was fighting for, what I had to come back to." He pressed it into my hand. "And this," he added, pulling out a neatly folded piece of paper, "is for you. Don't open it until I'm gone." I nodded, my throat tight, unable to speak. We embraced one last time, a hug that felt both like an ending and a beginning. When he finally got into the car and drove away, I stood on the porch, holding the photograph and the folded note, watching until the car was a mere speck on the horizon. Inside, the house was achingly quiet, the silence a tangible presence. I slowly unfolded the note, my fingers trembling slightly. In Leo's familiar, slightly messy handwriting it read, "Dearest Grandma, I know I said a lot last night and this morning, but there's something else I needed to say, something I couldn't quite get out. Leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I know it's also the right thing. You taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step into the unknown. You gave me roots when I needed them most, and now you're giving me wings. I promise you, I will make you proud. I will work hard, I will learn, and I will become the man you always knew I could be. This scholarship isn't just for me, Grandma. It's for us. It's the culmination of everything you poured into me, every sacrifice, every late night, every quiet worry. Please don't ever feel alone. We'll talk every day if you want. I'll visit every chance I get, and I'll carry you with me, always, in my heart and in every choice I make. You are my home, Grandma. No matter where I go, I love you more than words can say. You're Leo." I reread the letter several times, the tears flowing freely now, but they were tears of profound love and an unexpected, deeply satisfying peace. He hadn't just accepted a scholarship, he had accepted his future, a future built on the foundation of our shared past. He was indeed carrying me with him, not as a burden, but as the enduring strength that propelled him forward. And in that quiet kitchen, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was not an ending, but a glorious new chapter, for both of us. A testament to the unbreakable bond between a grandmother and her grandson. A story of love reshaped, but never diminished,